Be wise today. It is madness to defer. Next day the fatal precedent will plead. Thus on, till wisdom is pushed out of life. Procrastination is the thief of time. Year after year it steals, till all are fled, and to the mercies of the moment leaves the vast concerns of an eternal scene. Procrastination, the act of delaying or postponing things, is often represented as a productivity killer, the thief of time. And it is true, procrastination shouldn't be deployed on activities with short term deadlines. It will only add burden to the future self and end up making you look lazy and miserable. You're better off with productivity on these types of tasks. On the contrary, procrastination is a phenomenal tool for activities with long-term deadlines. Leonardo da Vinci, known for his expertise across multiple disciplines, most importantly his paintings, was a chronic procrastinator. Leonardo rarely completed any of the great projects that he sketched in his notebooks. His groundbreaking research in human anatomy resulted in no publications, at least not in his lifetime. Not only did Leonardo fail to realize his potential as an engineer and scientist, but he also spent his career hounded by creditors to whom he owed paintings and sculptures for which he had accepted painting, but for some reason could not deliver. Even when his deadline was extended by years, his surviving paintings amount to no more than 20. 5 or 6, including the Mona Lisa, were still in his possession when he died. Apparently, he was still tinkering with them. Perhaps he could have stopped delaying this much and published his work and became successful in various different fields. That would also mean he wouldn't have created such paintings that stand the test of time. Leonardo's studies of how light strikes a spear, for example, enabled the continuous modeling of the Mona Lisa and St. John the Baptist. His work in optics might have delayed a project, but his final achievements in painting depended on the experiments, physical and intellectual, that he documented in his notebooks. Far from being a distraction like many of his contemporaries thought, they represented a lifetime of productive brainstorming, a private working out of ideas on which his more public work depended. In 1927, a psychologist named Bluma Zeigarnik conducted a study answering the following question. What is the relation between the status and memory of an activity which has been interrupted before it could be completed and one which has not been interrupted? This came to be known as the Zeigarnik effect, where incomplete or interrupted activities are remembered better than completed ones. When you're procrastinating, the activity that's incomplete continues to reside in your mind, waiting for a solution. During this time, let's say you're watching a cartoon, you start to connect unexpected, surprising connections between your task and the cartoon that might not even be related to the cartoon itself, but thanks to our mind, it gives a different perspective to your task, making it more original, unique, and different from the ordinary. In 1968, during the March on Washington, Martin Luther King Jr. was about to give one of the greatest speeches, which facilitated the Civil Rights Act, was sitting there, crossing out lines and scribbling new ones as he awaited his turn.
I have the pleasure to present to you Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
When he finished the promissory note analogy, he paused, and in that breach, something unexpected, historic, and largely unheralded happened. Martin's favorite gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson, who had performed earlier in that day, called to him from nearby. Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream. Martin clutched the speaker's lectern and seemed to reset. I watched him push the text of his prepared remarks to one side. In front of all those people, cameras and microphones, Martin winged it.
Will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
With a single phrase, Martin Luther King Jr. joined Jefferson and Lincoln in the ranks of men who have shaped modern America. If Martin Luther King Jr. had stuck to the script, he wouldn't have probably improvised, and it wouldn't have had the impact it had. The speech went on to depart drastically from the draft I had delivered, and I'll be the first to tell you that America is better for it. During the 1980s, when computers were very expensive and sophisticated, used and seen exclusively in a professional setting, there comes this guy with a vision to put computers in people's homes.
There is a common conception that people have of computers, which is more along the lines of 1984. Very large, very centralized computers. And I know the privacy issue is very, very hot in the media these days. But what we're finding is that when people actually see what a personal computer is, they see something that looks, approximately, they can hold it in their hands, it weighs 12 pounds. Again, they can throw it out the window if they don't like it. And it is very decentralized. It's very democratic. And it's something that completely is almost the opposite of the 1984 conception we have. And what we're finding is it is enriching people's lives. It is freeing people to do things we think people do best.
This is the state of smartphones when Apple launched the iPhone.
What's wrong with your user interfaces? Well, the problem with them is really sort of in the bottom 40 there. It's this stuff right here. They all have these keyboards that are there whether you need them or not to be there. But what we're going to do is get rid of all these buttons and just make a giant screen. A giant screen.
The time Steve Jobs was putting off things and noodling on possibilities was time well spent in letting more divergent ideas come to the table, as opposed to diving right in with the most conventional, the most obvious, the most familiar. Not only Steve Jobs, Leonardo, and Martin Luther King, Lincoln didn't complete his famous Gettysburg Address until the night before the speech. He probably followed his usual habit in such matters, using great deliberation in arranging his thoughts and molding his phrases mentally, waiting to reduce them to writing until they had taken satisfactory form. Aaron Sorkin, behind Social Network and Newsroom, said, "You call it procrastination, I call it thinking." Mozart wrote the intro for his famous opera Don Giovanni the night before it premiered, while he may have been hungover. I hope this video helps at least someone to try and benefit from productive procrastination. You don't necessarily have to go hardcore and be like Leonardo. Remember, Leonardo regretted that he had left so much unfinished in his deathbed. Productive mediocrity requires discipline of an ordinary kind. It is safe and threatens no one. Nothing will be changed by mediocrity. Mediocrity is completely predictable. Mediocrity is the opposite of what we call genius. Mediocrity gets perfectly mundane things done on time, but genius is uncontrolled and uncontrollable. You cannot produce a work of genius according to a schedule or an outline.